This is round 9 of 15 from the 2014 Rapid Chess Championship. Carlsen has white in this one versus Movsesian. And this is a really cool endgame, in my opinion at least. I really like the endgame technique in this particular game. So, what did we have opening-wise? Queen's Gambit declined, Ragozin Variation. We see Carlsen on the white side of the Ragozin, and also the black side when he later plays Levanteronian. I believe that's... What round was that? That's round 11. He plays against Aronian. We'll get to see that soon enough. Okay, but first, h6, bishop takes, queen a4. Very forcing line. I like seeing that knight c6 move. This is a variation I might very well adopt on the white side. I like seeing that because it's one less thing I have to worry about, right? You have to worry about this c5 strike at the center. If there's going to be some strike, it's with this e5 advance. So knight c6 was an only move. You had to defend the bishop. So okay, here comes e3. Black, on the other hand, does have the bishop pair, so that is, of course, a long-term advantage, but he has still some work to do before he could get active. So bishop e2, pawn takes. We don't recapture right away. Getting out of the pin, he's not going to go anywhere so fast. And by getting out of the pin right now, this is allowing for knight to e4 with the tempo on the queen. We see that take shape soon. a6 is not threatening just yet, at least, this b5 advance, since there would be knight takes pawn. This rook is undefended. Bishop takes pawn, still not there. Same idea. For as long as this rook is unprotected, b5 is not a threat. So bishop d6, knight e4, knight takes bishop, and now d5. If you do something tame like, let's say, rook f to c1, okay, this weakens some dark squares, but it's very static structure. Not too much going on. I believe white is still the side who has a pull because of the bishop situation, because of a slight lead in development, but white is with d5 at this point right here, trying to create some imbalance with regard to the pawn structure, and is doing what more, grabbing some space. Okay, so the knight is kicked. I mean, the alternative to capture, well, now he's a weak link. So one weak pawn translates into one potential plan for white. So that's why we're not having the capture on d5. That would make this pawn on d6 an isolated pawn. So it's the immediate retreat to a7. Queen to b4. e5. Rook c1. Bishop f5. The knight is looking to reposition. Get into this square. That would be nice. Knight on b6. This is the only open file. If you could control that support point, or not the support point, the pivot point that the black rooks need to contest the c file, that would be nice. So maybe it's a step in that direction when you see knight d2. Maybe another way to look at it is, what exactly is the knight doing on f3 for as long as these pawns remain like so? Really not so much. So it's time to reposition. Knight to d2. Rook on f to c8. Bishop e2. One pair of rooks are exchanged. This is to be expected, really, when you just have one open file. Both sets of rooks usually come off. Soon enough, we'll have the queens coming off the board. So this bishop gets active. That was an interesting move, right? We had e4, the bishop comes back, and now this diagonal is no longer under the control of the bishop, so white occupies it. Hitting the knight a7. He's having a tough day. a4. Ouch, right? Where does he go? Covered. Nowhere to go. Queen c7, h4. Okay, we have a flight square now. We don't have to worry about having to interpose if there's a check on c1. So here comes h4. Multi-purpose, right? We're not just focused on just, okay, I want to have a flight square for my king. I'm looking further. I want to maybe use him as some aggressive force. Maybe h5. Kick that bishop back. Notice what that would do. Just making a passing move. This now renews back rank issues if this bishop is forced to h7. That's nice. Okay, so we don't have that just yet. Black is not going to make a b6 move. Instead, h5, saying, you know what, I'm not going to let you do that to my bishop, and renew some back rank issues. So h5 by black, bishop e2, a5, queens are exchanged. Who stands better and for what reasons? You may think that, well, when we look at good versus bad bishops, who has the better bishop? Whose bishop is good? This one is probably the good bishop, right? When we look at these fixed pawns on light squares, he's obstructed in many ways, but then again, well, we also have this one over here. It's not completely the case here. Maybe he has some target at some point, but the other main feature, once we look past the good versus bad bishop situation, once we assess, okay, where are the fixed pawns, what color squares are our bishops on, the next thing we look into, maybe, is that d5 pawn, that space invader pawn. What is he doing exactly? He's really negating this knight's influence on the game. This knight turns out to be restricted in a great, great way. And the control that's used for the remainder of this game is very instructional. Let's see how it takes shape. First, okay, what do? We need to get our kings working for black. Bishop d3, the knight wants to jump into c4, hitting at pretty much everything. So, what does black have to do? Knight c8 has to prepare to be a complete defender of these pawns. These knights currently offset one another. Okay, f3, and now g4. Getting the king now working soon. King f2, defend over on a4, king g3, and now I'm not sure what that move did actually. Bishop to a6, maybe a little bit of a passing type of move. I'm not quite sure. I can't really wrap my head around what bishop to a6 is doing exactly. Okay, but king to d7, or king to d8, and now g5. Pawn takes, and now f4. This is an interesting moment in the game, and maybe the last critical moment here for black. The computer is recommending f5 just to open up the position, and I think the main thing, to have this knight finally have some breathing space. Notice, now that f5 is not played in this position, what was played? Bishop e8. Now white gets to play f5, and what is this pawn doing exactly? What is this pawn doing? This knight is dead. How does he get active? How can this knight maneuver himself on any of these 5 ranks? This knight, well, actually forget about these 5 ranks. He could go to h6 because of the squares that are being covered right here. Maybe better stated like this. Let's notice first these 6th rank squares. Let's see where the knight cannot go to. Clearly you can't go to these squares. Or these. Or this one, since the bishop is watching over it. He could go to this square. And that's it. The rest of his life, that sounds so bad, but it's true. The rest of his life is spent by playing to the 7th and 8th rank squares. He gets to go to c8, and his next greatest move from there is a7. And once he's on a7, his next greatest move is back to c8. What a life he has. That's all he could do. He could just shift about on these 7th and 8th rank squares, and that's it. Because of all of these squares that are covered by the pawns, what I have currently highlighted are covered just by the pawns. This one by the bishop, and okay, you could get here, but you can't really even pass the 2-word test. Now what? Where are you going once you're on h6? Here, it's not happening. There's always a bishop that'll land on e2. So this is, again, the last critical moment, I believe. After f4 was played, you need to have this f5 move in. At least now, the knight could go back home, or a home square of the knight, and then plant on f6. Okay, but it wasn't played. And now this is just super, super cramping. So now it's just a matter of technique, and I really, really like the technique that was used from this point on. So this bishop needs to stay put. Knight d1, knight a7, knight c3. You see what just happened there? What is black ready to do? Right here, this is already, what white is doing is using very good technique. Carlsen is anticipating what exactly? He's anticipating the only pawn break that black has to try and free the position a little bit. It would be nice if this pawn was no longer around. You know why? The knight would finally have a square to go to, b6. So black would really like to get this advance in. This is recognized. Knight d1, knight a7, black's ready to do this. Knight c3, you can't do it anymore. So it seems like you really can't make much progress. Okay, the king just maybe goes back and forth. What does this king do that's anything great? Well, we're going to see that. He takes a hike all the way over here, plays b4, and now by having b4 and keeping pressure on a5, that's going to free up the knight because b5 is never a threat at that point because you could be taking on the a5 square. Let's see. King to e7. The king gets all the way over to this a3 square. b4 is played. And after king c7, the knight is like, okay, I'm no longer needed over here. I'm going to come back over in this direction. That's exactly what we see, this little W, where the knight gets over here and attacks this pawn. So we have that transition. The king's over here. There's pressure on a5. Knight d1. This pawn is taken. The king is there to recapture. And now the king is in a spot to watch over b5. So role reversal. The king is there to prevent b5. The knight is now freed up to put pressure on this h5 pawn. One question I might have here is what if b5 is played now? Well, you could take, knight takes b5. I'm sorry. After b5, b takes a5, b takes a4, knight c3, this pawn is going to be scooped right back up. And you can see on the side here the evaluation looking at +6 and increasing. So he's got to the perfect position. b4 is there, pressure on a5, time to reposition the knight. And here he goes. And is this knight going to be able to come back over here to defend? No way. How do you even get to this g7 square? Can't do it. Knight f1. He completes this little W move. Pawn is scooped up. And he's a passed pawn. And it's just converted very easily. Eventually, black finds himself in Zugzwang. King a6. The king can't move. Well, the king can move. But if you do move, you lose b6. The knight can move, but if you move, you lose f6. Black throws in the towel at this point. So I thought that was a very cool endgame technique right there, utilizing this space advantage and having that king sneak all the way over here to a3, and then freeing up the knight to do that little W hop, pick up the h-pawn, and just as we saw in this final position here, black ends up in Zugzwang. So, okay, that's all for this video. Feel free to click the annotation link at the end of this video for round 10 of the tournament, or check in the video's description for links to the other 14 games.